And he also started private practice. In his work in Kiryas Yol, and even in his private practice, he became very involved in very sensitive type of topics, child abuse. He was at the forefront of making the summer community more aware of some of the child abuse cases, which unfortunately were happening. He had many Hasidic clients. He was referred often by the Skver Rebbe. Skver Rebbe would refer his Hasidim to him, so that he felt that they could trust him. He was someone they could trust. He was someone that they could relate to. And he was involved in at the same time, he worked mainly with children, but he was involved in many chinuch issues in Muncie, and in the Kiryas Yol school system. And a lot of it was what we'll call pro bono. I mean, it was not paid things that he did, but it was things that he felt needed to be done. And a lot of it was behind the scenes. Nobody really knew that he was involved in these things. I had discussions with him about certain things that he was involved in, but even I didn't know the extent. During Shiva, people came out and told me, oh, he was involved in this, he was involved in this. People in Eretz Yisrael were telling me that they had conversations with him, which I had no idea about. He was involved in a lot of stuff. It was not for notoriety, it was not for public. It was that he felt that this was the right thing to do, and he had the ability to take on these type of things. This was, it's one of the, he told me it was kind of the ironies of his life, was that he thought that chinuch was his calling. And it turned out that, that was something that he was very good at, but it turned out in the end that his calling was, as a psychologist, was helping people, helping children. And it became a passion of his. He was truly passionate about the work that he did. He was very involved, very active member of Nefesh, which is the mental health, the Orthodox from Mental Health Organization Association. And this was something that he was truly passionate about. It was helping people and not only helping people in private practice, but trying to make a difference, again, like I mentioned, in the school systems, in the chinuch, and in just so many different areas he was involved in. And when he was taken from us, it was, of course, a tremendous shock. I mean, just the way it happened was extremely sudden, extremely shocking, and it's still the type of thing that we're all trying to deal with somehow. And it's really only recently that we've been able to even ask ourselves the question, okay, how can we perpetuate who he was, his life? How can his neshama live on? And I think that one of the ways that he can continue to exist and live in our lives is by trying to emulate and take from him the things that made him special and unique. And Javi and I kind of sat down and talked about what, from our perspective, what do we feel were the things that were unique about him, that made him the man who he was, and the way in which we can perpetuate his neshama and his life. So the first thing I think that really made him at one point was his devotion to family. He was absolutely devoted to his family, and we're not just talking about children and his wife and the nuclear family, which was, of course, very important to him, but extended family. It was extremely important to him, very important. He would fly, without a moment's thought, he would fly to a cousin's bris, to a simcha, any type of simcha, to any type of thing. There was no question in his mind. And it's something that struck me especially because I just didn't grow up with that type of sense. And at first I felt like it was kind of strange. When I first married Chavi, I felt like it was kind of strange. And it took me a while, but I realized that there was something very special about that. About his devotion and his commitment. That family always came first. I mean, obviously when it comes to family, there are times when there are stresses and there are times when there are difficulties. But it didn't matter. The fact that it was family overrode everything else. The second thing that I think made him really special, and I think as you'll see all these things kind of tie together, there's a thread that runs throughout who he was. He was extremely multifaceted. I think even just going through his biography, you kind of get a sense of all the different things he was involved in. One of the things that I heard during Shiva a lot, the way to describe him was he was kind of a Renaissance man. I mean, he was also a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was in the world of chinuch. He had a degree in biochemistry. He was a psychologist. And then he also had other passions. I mean, he rode a motorcycle as well. He flew planes. And one thing that he told us very often was flying planes for him was not just a lot of fun, but he felt truly like this was a way that he could connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He felt just seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creations from that perspective gave him such an appreciation for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for his kesher, his connection to God. There's a way that he, being alone up in the air, just gave him such a feeling of connection to God. And the various things that he did in his life, all the various different things, they were all related to, okay, what does that have to do with God? He was involved in so many different things, and he was not afraid to try new things. There's not, most of us, I say most of us, I mean, we have hang-ups about trying something new. We like to stay in our little bubble. He had no hang-ups about that. He was absolutely, he had no problems trying new things, and that all contributed to who he was. The different experiences that he had in life contributed to who he was. I touched on before, some of the midah of emes. Like I mentioned, there was something that he was disillusioned by in the world of chinuch, whatever it was, it's not important. But something that disturbed him, and something that pained him. I had other conversations with him about things that he saw in the world of chinuch, in the world of just in Klal Yisrael, that disturbed him, that pained him, because they were not emes. It was not right. It was not the way things should be, and it really bothered him. He was very idealistic. He felt, that there was hope, that there was things that could be done. But emes was an overriding factor for him. He was always true to himself. You can imagine most people would have a hang-up. Riding a motorcycle into Kiryas Yol, I think for most people, they would just be too self-conscious about it. But for him, this is who he is, and it didn't bother him. He was not bothered by the perspective that people had about him. If it was right for him, he did it. That was the overriding concern, was whether that was emes for him. Touching on kind of the same theme, most of us like to consider ourselves that we belong to a certain group. Whatever label you want to attach, yeshivish, modern, whatever it is, he didn't have that type of thing. Every group was his group. Every type of scenario, he was always known as the person who belonged to all the different shuls. Wherever he lived in New Haven, there was this shul and that shul, and they didn't get along, but he was the guy who went to both of the shuls. It didn't bother him. In Muncie, again, there's various shuls, and they have their various differences, and this one's modern, quote unquote, this one's yeshiva. He went to all of them. It didn't bother him. It didn't matter to him. Everybody was his group. Kiryas Yol was his group. Satmar was his group. Skver was his group. Every group was his group. He didn't have any hang-ups about that he needed to isolate himself in one particular group. For him, a Jew was a Jew was a Jew. It didn't matter who they were, what their quote-unquote label was. It didn't bother him. He would talk to anybody.